Welcome to session 6. Now, babushka dolls are a fascinating toy, and it's one of those things that I love playing with as a child and how they go together. Now, the interesting thing about babushka dolls is they can only really go together one way, but they are a very crafty toy in the sense that they're very delicate and be able to go together very nicely, and there's a beautiful package. Now, I'm hoping today, within this presentation, Blair's going to be able to demonstrate to you exactly how delicate the processes are that DKO architecture use with their large-scale vertical and horizontal projects to essentially manage their large projects like the virtual babushka doll. So I'm really excited to see what you have to share with us today, Blair. So I'll now hand it over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nathan. Welcome everybody. Hope you're enjoying Arc Intensive so far. My name is Blair Calvert. I'm going to have a chat to you about managing the virtual babushka doll, which is essentially a discussion about modules and how to manage them. So I'll just give you a quick intro about DKO. Who are we? So we started off in 2000. As a handful of people in Melbourne. I've now grown over the years through a fair bit of regression, ups and downs, and we're now running at about 200 people, primarily across Australia, but also in Vietnam and Auckland office. Melbourne would be considered our sort of key home office with close to 90 staff there. So what sort of projects does DKO do? Everything from interiors, one-off homes, terrace homes, communities, and there's a variety of communities that we do from a master planning level. Some of them are small communities, apartment blocks and the like. Large communities where we do multi-use, multi-res, and vertical communities. So we do a few high-rise buildings, number of which, this is Marina Tower, which is over 40 stories, about 450 apartments. In recent years we've done quite a bit of hotel work. This one's the Marriott in Docklands. Hotel interiors obviously tails in with that. Second home, also known as the workplace. And urban design. So a fair bit of master planning, urban design component. This is Docklands, obviously encompassing Marina Tower. Why is this relevant for what we're talking about today? So we'll be talking about large projects, specifically tall ones and wide ones. Where that's relevant for modules is we use a lot of modularity in our designs and our documentation, and Archicad works very well with the modulation, and we find that the nature of the company and the size of projects we work for, the teams that we construct, tend to push us in directions in regards to where the workflows are and how we use our modules. So we'll just run through a couple of just basic things in regards to modules. Worth noting that just the general out-of-the-box Archicad guide on modules, worth a read if you're unfamiliar with what modules are. I'll give you a bit of a rundown here. In essence, basically you're looking at modules as a mini PLN file, effectively. So it's a small file which contains plan information, 3D information, but not a lot else. It's fairly well stripped back, so it doesn't contain any views, it doesn't contain any sections or elevations, and it also has a very limited range of libraries and attributes that are attached to it. So you'll find that they are substantially smaller than a PLN file. Why do we use these things? A very small example here, but effectively efficiency and consistency. The ability to use the same thing over and over again and not have to redocument it or not have to document it in every instance, and you start working in types rather than instances, works very well from an efficiency point of view. There are a few parameters around that. Obviously, a module is exactly that. It's a module. It's like a Lego brick. You can't alter it. And so you can't modify these things as you go. You need to be really rigorous about how you use them, because every variation either breaks the module or creates a new module. And you can get to a point where if you've modified enough modules, it probably wasn't worth having modules in the first place. So you can see an example here. We've got a bathroom type. This bathroom type will be used throughout a project. All going well, it'll be used numerous times to the point where you could have it, this bathroom documented once, but exists 50 times across the building. Also consistency. We find that if you have specified a product, you draw it once, you specify it once, and it's consistent throughout the project. Downside of that is if you've got it wrong in one place, you'll have it wrong in 50 places. A couple of basics. Now, there's a couple of snapshots out of the Graphisoft guide. We'll talk about the way DK use the modules and how we think you should use them. So how we'd recommend. A couple of examples here. One of the methods of creating a module is to do file save as from a PLN, and it will basically save out a .mod file of it, and it will dump out pretty much all the associated sort of extra data in there other than just your floor plan data and your 3D data. So any views, attributes, external libraries, etc. will all disappear. You really shouldn't be creating modules like that if you're planning on using them throughout a building in a sort of a modular sense. Saving stories as a module, would recommend against this as well. The primary thing is if you're going to push out a module, it really should be a published entity. And saving selected modules, elements as a module, you can do it. You can basically select things on a floor plan and do save as module. There's instances where you may want to do that, especially if you're doing some rapid prototyping and you've got a number of different examples all wrote up on the same floor plan. The issue with that is consistency. That if you inadvertently select a different group of elements from the initial elements that you'd selected last time you saved that module, you'll get inconsistent results. The other trap is if you've got things grouped, you may find that one item that's grouped inside a selection that you've got ends up expanding your module out well beyond what you thought it was. You may have elements halfway across the page that you weren't expecting. 90% of the module creation that we would do at DKO is out through a published set, and you go through and it's a story by story thing, and you'll publish the element out. It gives you a consistent response in regards to the naming is always the same. The content obviously will change in itself, but the parameters around the content won't, so it'll always be from the same floor plan, from the same layer combination, etc. So I'll just take you through a quick thing here to show you creating a mod. So I've got a file here with a bunch of template content in it. So here we've got a bathroom. You'll notice it looks pretty messy. That's because we've got all the layers on. One important thing to note is when you publish out a mod, it will only publish the things that we'll see on screen. So your layer combination, we've got a layer combination here called modules out, which is generally the majority of the layers that we have in our layer list. The layers will be filtered at the other end in regards to what you're looking at. So the project that you insert the module into, it will just use the layers and layer combination from there. You're better off publishing out more modules, more layers rather than less. Another key trick is if you're using any solid modeling operations, and that's a hidden layer that you would use, the solid modeling layer that you use must travel with the module, otherwise you'll lose that linkage. So in regards to how to publish this out, I've got some content here. It's on -17. From here you can see that there's bathroom type 1 here. We've got the modules out layer combination, which has everything you've got there. That then transfers out into a publisher set. Pay attention to these. It's important that you check these settings. This is just a single story mod, so it can go out just with the current story range. If you're doing something along the lines of a townhouse or other multi-story mod, you need to check this range and select the range for what you want to publish out. We generally leave this one off. We don't generally want to see things published from other stories, especially if you've got things showing on level above, like a stair or something. You may well end up with duplicates of that being published in like a negative story or a lower positive story. So from there, basically you press the publish button. That'll publish out a .mod file. .mod files are usually very, very small. We're talking hundreds of kilobytes for this here. If you find that your modules for kitchens or bathrooms or other small things in the megs, you'll probably find that there's either a large library part or something else that's bloating the file. Once you've created that mod, it's fairly easy to place it. So within the Hotlink module manager, you can go through and just basically select it from that. So as an example, we'll just plonk this over here. Place Hotlink. You'll see here there's a list of mods. In any file, if you've got mods placed already, it'll have a cached memory of these. One thing to watch in a teamwork environment, these are very hard to change. If you have two mods of the same name, or you're swapping a mod that's of the same name, you will struggle to do that in teamwork environment. If it gets to the point you need to do that, you may well have to save out a PLN, clear out the mods that you need to, replace them, and then put them back in. As the way teamwork works, you tend to, it caches I suppose, for lack of a better term, memories of mods on your C drive. So I'll take this here, select master ID. This is a handy tool for being able to add extra data to the codes within the mods. Also very handy for using for graphic overrides, etc. You can do some handy tricks with it. So if I grab this tool out here, and bring up settings for this, you'll see that the BTO1 Hotlink module master ID has actually been appended to the start of the name of the ID of the toilet. That'll come in handy later on identifying things and labeling things if you need to utilize that. Updating modules. We go through external content, Hotlink module manager. In a solo environment, this is a fairly easy thing to use. You can go through Any mods that have been published recently will come up here as being modified in status. In a teamwork environment, it becomes a little bit trickier. You'll find that there's a extra toolbar here which comes in, and you need to reserve and release. It can be quite cumbersome to work with. Definitely recommend that you have one person designated, or at least one person at a time designated to be looking after this, because it does require a lot of reservation, opening and closing the Hotlink module manager, and that becomes quite a lengthy exercise if you're in a project with numerous people and a large number of modules that you need to work through. So in here, and you'll find that these here will be listed as modified. If they're listed as missing, check your file paths through there. You may have an error with that. Something's either been deleted or moved. The other catch can be that if somebody has renamed a folder and so the path linkage is out, you'll see here that these modules are quite small. Those are basically talking sort of 2 meg each, give or take. Okay, nesting of modules, which is where the babushka doll comes in. The ability to nest modules within other modules is very handy and becomes quite efficient. Just as a general diagram here, I've thrown some colours on a section of a floor plan, just to identify. So the green is the facade module, the bluey purple colour is the floor plate itself, and the red is the kitchens and bathrooms. These are all repeated through. This is a little snapshot of a corner of a building which has got a mixed use apartments and hotel in there. I'll just jump across to what that looks like in here. So you'll notice in here there's the nesting of the modules in here. So you'll see there's a typical level here. Within that typical level there's a double type room, and within that double type room is bath type and a vanity type. This can all get a little bit overwhelming. If you've got a large project, it's worth having this mapped out onto a worksheet somewhere, so you can introduce any of your staff into it. It will take them a little while to get their head around. It can become quite overwhelming in regards to these. One thing that's worth noting is this guy here, the show hierarchy in browser. I've just pulled this up from another file through here. Really handy tool to basically see where things are nested and where they're inserted directly. So this is from a housing project, and you can see in here this is a housing type 1. Noting that not just the file path is here, but also you can open the mod directly, which I would recommend against, but it's good to be able to track down where the modules are coming from, because in large complicated projects sometimes publishing paths are not always apparent, and you'll find that trying to track down where modules should or shouldn't be can be quite tricky. Another example of this, fairly messy, but this is basically a townhouse in here. If I jump in, try to put this onto something a little bit more sensible as a floor plan. You'll notice that this is a PO1, which we determined to be a powder room. Our computer's running a little slow here. And that's a bathroom type 1. And the bathroom type 1 is actually then nested inside townhouse type 1. And then there's a facade wrapped around that. So when that enters the master plan at the other end, it will basically be a complete house with a facade wrapped around it. Inside that is a housing interior. Inside that is the kitchens and bathrooms and mods, etc. And that's how we get into this sort of faceting here, where you come through and find that there's bathrooms, kitchens, laundries and powder rooms all in that area. I just wanted to talk through file structures. Some fairly simple diagrams here. With any of our smaller type developments or projects, we'll generally try and run with a single file. It simplifies the attribute management immensely, also the library management as well. It's good to have a policy of basically ordering how you do these things. So you get bathrooms and kitchens, etc., on negative stories, and then linking upwards. It's important you're clear from the start which way these things go. It can get confusing if you've got things on bathrooms above the building and kitchens below the building and then linking them up. From a rationale point of view, it's better off if things flow in one direction, either up or down. We've tried both, but generally we find that building things down and then linking them back up is the more logical way to go. Also, it's important that you have a look at the project from the outset. In an ideal world, all the kitchens and bathrooms will be nice and regular and modular right from word go. That's not always the way it works. Generally, designers like to have more free reign than to be clipping Lego blocks together. So you need to have a look at what's the largest easily modular portion in that. So on a large project which is reasonably regular, you might find that's a floor plate. Next step down would be an apartment, and then step below that would be kitchens and bathrooms. On a bespoke project you may get no modules. Obviously there's not really a great deal of efficiency, but if you've only got 5 apartments in a building, it's probably irrelevant. There's not really any specific tipping point in regards to when is it necessary to module, or where's the balance point for the extra work creating and updating the modules versus just drawing them copy paste or grouping. From there, it's a judgment call. Generally you'll find if you've got sort of more than 4 or 5 of a thing, it's definitely worth moduling. If it's maybe 2 or 3, you may find it's easier just to copy paste and have things grouped. So here, if you've got unique apartments, the smallest or the largest portion is just kitchens and bathrooms. If you had a small project which has got regular apartments, so you can actually get some apartment typologies in there, then you'll find that you can actually start getting these linkages. So you do your kitchens below, your bathrooms above, put placeholders in between. I'll point out why that's important later. It's important to try and have a bit of a plan, because 9 times out of 10 you'll have bathroom type 1, 2 and 3, and then you'll get a bathroom type 3A because there'll be some minor variation. There'll be a column or a duct that appears with that. Keeping things all in the one file means that all your layer combinations, attribute management is immensely easier. The other major advantage is you can use trace reference. So you can have a live trace reference, and when you're drawing your apartment type 1, you can reference up to the floor plan to see where the core is, or the columns are. For bathroom type 1, you can select one instance where that occurs in the building, and whether it be apartment type 1 or 2, wherever, and then you can use the trace reference as a background to double check to make sure it's going to fit. Step up from that is a sort of a medium to large file. We end up using this for quite a few of our projects. I'd say almost the majority of our projects. We tend to run larger projects in larger teams, and we have a fit out and master. The attribute management comes a little bit trickier in regards to the fact you're managing 2 files worth of layers and building materials, etc. But we find that it splits the teams nicely in regards to we have different workflows where we'll have upfront design, general massing, design, town planning. Once we get into DD, we find that the workload on the interior side ramps up a fair bit, and there's coordination between obviously you start getting structural, mechanic, hydraulic in there. We also end up quite regularly having to put out marketing documents from that. We find that the splitting the file into a fit out and master component. So basically all the kitchens, bathrooms, apartment types all get pushed out as a .mod file and linked into the master. Sometimes we'll find typical floor plates, which is handy if it works. It doesn't always happen that way. And then we'll link things into a negative story and then up into the floors in the master. Stepping up again, we get into a fit out master and layout book. We will split the layout book out of the master file when it gets to the point where it's too large. We find that the storage in the teamwork file of all the views on layouts creates a fairly huge data load on that, and it really bloats the file size out. We've found historically that splitting off the layout book and just running a PMK export usually always helps the master file stay a bit lighter, and will help with send receive times, reserve, open, close, etc. from there. A little bit of a different tilt on this one. Missed over here. Yeah, so housing typology. Housing files are a little bit of a different beast. We will run with a fit out file for all our smaller stuff, kitchens and bathrooms, but we also quite often extend that out to robes, powder rooms, basically anything that we can use from a documentation point of view over and over. When you're doing master plans which involve 200, 400, 1,000 homes, having the ability to document things once and then use them numerous times is invaluable. Just for an example, we've got a project in Adelaide. We've got 10 bathroom types total, and that's over 1,000 homes that they're servicing. So you've got effectively 10 sheets of documentation for a bathroom, and that's being used in over 1,000 homes. There's quite a bit of repetition in how we work and how the home builders work. We find that the typologies we can reuse numerous times. Generally what will happen is the streetscape though will have a similar typology, and we'll run that with different facades along the front, but fundamentally the building underneath is the same. Other thing worth noting here is the master plans are actually quite small files in regards to how many stories they carry. Obviously they carry a lot of content, but the typology files, when you're using townhouses or houses, obviously it's a multi-story mod, and we'll use that. So we'll have basically an internal, and then the facade, and then another facade option. That starts getting a little bit silly in regards to, by the time you've done the typologies and you go through, you'll find that we start to get to the point where these files start to get pretty large. This one's 780 down and 268 up, so just over 1,000 stories in there, which may sound a little bit ridiculous, but the actual file size from creating all these stories is not as large as you would think. The actual content per story is quite light, and we generate a lot of the documentation out of here, and then from the master plan it's light because you're only producing document for the house that's site specific, whereas most of the drawing actually comes from the typology file itself. So you'll see that the kitchen, bathroom types, etc. Follow the path via PMK, and they move across to the layout book. The site files come across to the layout book, and then the typology, so the per house type documentation all goes to the layout book, all via PMK, whereas the modules follow a more orderly pass through fit out, typology, and master plan. Pretty simple diagram here. It's probably gross simplification. Team leader, model manager here is in red. When you get into large teamwork files, especially, the managing of the Hotlink module manager becomes absolutely critical. Very much in the same way that the updating of drawings and issuing of drawings, that really needs to be a singular person running that. Or at least one person at a time running that. The difficulty in a teamwork environment is that you have to reserve and release the Hotlink module manager every time you update. It can become a very substantial bottleneck on a large project if you've got numerous team members overlapping. It's also important to note that you should probably have your permissions in teamwork set so that the team leader / model manager has rights to everything, whereas your standard team members don't necessarily need rights to all of the things. Couple other things to cover on this. Attributes, bane of every BIM manager in the history of Archicad. A lot of the reasoning behind running one or two files rather than running a whole raft of different PLN files and then linking them back in is surrounding attribute management. The way Archicad carries its attributes around is difficult to say the least. Just as an example, if you needed to add a wall type into a file, we would usually drive that from the typology file. That's generally where the need is, but you need to designate one file as your master file for any attribute management in here. So just as an example, I'll choose composites because they are the absolute worst. Actually, I'm in the wrong file here. I'll just bump across to 24. Just wait for this to load up. This box is not your friend. Do not leave that box clicked if you are updating attributes. Just for an example, I'll take a fairly standard blockwork single wall here. It's got a bunch of associated attributes go with it. I'll append that over there. I'll then grab pretty much the same wall, just a slightly different width, and append that over here. If we now have a quick look through, you'll see that it starts to replicate all these things. If you then publish a mod out with these attributes in it, it will then pollute your master file as well. If you can imagine doing that on with every attribute, if you do that a number of times, it gets out of hand very, very quickly. You do not want to have this box clicked. If you can avoid it, tread very carefully. If you don't know what you're doing, you need to go and ask your bin manager. It can cause absolute nightmares. The other one is embedded libraries. I'll get to that in a minute. Templates. Have your template set up with more than you need to start with. You'll find that it is easier to delete things out. This index number here is absolutely critical to how Archicad works. You are better off having things already in the file and deleting them out if you don't need them, rather than adding them back in. The chances of getting the index number right if you're manually entering in things into files is slim to nil. The other thing is the files that you set up should be fit for purpose. You need to take the work out of the staff members' hands in that regard. You should have a skeleton file effectively set up. So if you have a look through this one here, when we have a typology file master set up ready to go, most of these floors and views are in here. Obviously not quite to this extent, but there's at least a system in place for that, and it's set up ready to go so content can be drawn in it immediately. And make sure you've got a modules out layer combination with all the modules you need, and make sure it's not a custom. If it's a custom layer combo that you're publishing your modules out, it'll be met with disaster. Things will fall off all the time. Common pitfalls. If you're publishing mods out, which is recommended method, don't right mouse click on a mod and open it up. From here, there is the option, if you've got groups on, to open this module, edit the module in a separate Archicad. Don't do that. If you do that and press save and then you publish later, it will overwrite any changes that you've made. It's not the way to do things. Don't insert stories. When you're putting these things in, Archicad remembers this source story. If you insert stories in between, so that you would have put in here, insert above, all these stories now all have a different index number here for the story number. Archicad doesn't cope with that very well at all. Don't name mods the same name, that should go without saying. And avoid embedded libraries. You'll find that if you have anything that looks like this in your library, it will bloat your files. You'll go from a 1 meg bathroom to a 6 meg bathroom. If you times that by 200 bathrooms across the project, it will start bloating your file. Anything with a master.dl script with an embedded library can cause some pretty serious issues. Okay, so a quick roundup. key points, basically, before you start, have a plan. If you're going into a housing project or an apartment project, have a bit of a mud map of what you think can be moduled, what you think isn't able to be moduled, and start creating your files on that basis. Always, if you've got a BIM manager handy, have a chat to them about that. Whichever firm you work for should have a raft of templates for these sorts of things, but it's good to have that preliminary plan to start off with. It'll alter, obviously, as projects do, but put some placeholders in there, make some space in the file for changes to happen. When you're publishing your mods, make sure you check the settings in them when you're publishing them out. So this here in options, check to make sure that these are the settings that you want. When you place the modules, check the settings as well. Same thing again, when you go in, place modules, check to make sure you've set a master module ID, a hotlink layer, and these settings here. Typically, you'll want to keep this one here, unless you're planning on having a module which stretches the floor plan, the wall height stretches up and down. If you do want that, then you can see that there's some settings to adjust there. Be rigorous with your attribute management and library management. Is absolutely key to keeping your file clean and fast, to not be bloating it. And if you find that there's things that you are doing over and over, then they should already be in the template. If not, they should get put in the template. Okay, that's it for me. I'll hand over to Nathan for any questions you may have.
Thanks very much, Blair. Thanks very much for a great presentation. It's a dry presentation to have in this time of the afternoon about Hotlinking modules. I know it's a hard slot and a hard presentation that I've given you, but once again, it's an important and critical topic. Now, before we move over to the questions, I just want to make people aware that haven't been here for all the sessions today, that to activate the chat on the right-hand side beside the screen, to see the comments and to be able to ask questions, please just log in. It isn't actually much of a trouble. We don't steal any data, or Vimeo doesn't either. It's just a simple thing just to recognize that you're not a bot. So Blair, we've got some good questions during your session, mate. Venata has asked you, how many layouts would be considered large enough to split to PMK?
As in split the main file off into a layout book.
Let's look at it as two sides. So let's look at that question as a double-loaded question. First of all, what's the kind of rule of thumb that you have for running your layout book separate to your model, and then obviously the first tier would be potentially, and this would be interesting to know exactly what your thoughts are, where you then just hotlink the views directly from the second file, and when is the line in the sand where you go to PMK, or it could be the whole way through?
So first part, we never link two files together, especially two teamwork files. There'll be tears. You don't want to do that. Always PMKs. PMKs are hugely efficient. They publish quickly. They update quickly. They're quite light in that respect.
Yes.
So we have linked files together in the past, and it's not a good option. Just the length of time. Second part of the question, file size. It really comes down to the amount of views, and views generally associate with sheets, but if you've got lots of like elevations and bits and pieces through there, that holds a lot of data in there. So a few hundred sheets probably wouldn't worry about it, but some of the housing subdivision ones, by the time you've got the builder's packs for each house and things, you're in the thousands of pages. That really, you just can't handle that in a master file with that. You need to split that off. So in theory, you'll know because you should be able to feel how sluggish the file's getting. But anything over a few hundred sheets, I'd say, would be rule of thumb.
Yep.
And it depends on how detailed documentation is. If you've got a lot of views that are generating all the time. The other one, in the layout book, we set everything to manual update.
Yes.
Because otherwise, every time, if you've got anything with pictorial hatching on elevations or anything along those lines, the moment you open that layout, you could be sitting there for 5 minutes just waiting. It stalls everything. Nothing moves until it's regenerated those views.
No, it does take a long time, and I've always been a fan of the manual update, because there could be one view on that sheet you don't want to actually update, even though the model is updated. You just don't want to issue it as automatically changed, I guess you could say. Yeah. So a couple of hundred. Paul's asked an interesting question then, relating more also to PMKs. So PMK files. Do you want to do the story on what a PMK file is for people that are kind of more modern users of Archicad? Or do you can do it, or I can do it. But you can take a pick. If you want to do it, you can do it.
The way I always phrase it is like a smart PDF. Basically, it's pretty much just vectors. The auto text does stay live though, which is good. One thing to watch is if you've got a mixture of views and PMKs, some of the auto text will just drop out, and you'll just end up with the layout reference type thing. You can't. You choose one method or the other. Don't have a mixture of both, because it will start dropping things out.
Now, I don't. You missed one specific nice point that I like making about PMKs, and this is probably the one risk thing that I often find is when we create PMKs and you have them already automatically linked into your publishing set, so the naming is pulling straight across into your publishing.
Yep.
Once you've created a PMK with a certain name, don't change the name. Have you had that fun before, Blair?
Yeah, and modules the same thing as well, especially in teamwork files. Teamwork files like to cache all sorts of bits of data on your C drive,
yes.
On the user C drive, and trying to remove that little piece of memory or whatever is almost impossible. You end up saving out PLNs and stripping stuff and then putting it back in.
Yeah.
It's pretty awful.
So there are risks associated with these large projects whereby you have to be very stringent in your naming. And once you've named something, if you really need to change it, you then need to go into your file in the layout sheet that actually is referencing the drawing that you have changed the name of, and relink it to the renamed view, because otherwise it will just continue to link to that old file that you have in place. So, so Paul asked the question about how you manage them. I guess where are they all being stored at the moment, Blair? When you're publishing all your PMKs, and how is that accessing?
We've got a workflow where we've got sort of a what we call a common files directory. So we've got a folder there. Now, in the perfect world of BIM Cloud, you store it there. We haven't gone down that path. We've got our own kind of in-house systems in place for that. So they just get put into a folder. And once you've got the structure set up, and mention this in templates, that once you've got that folder structure set up and the naming convention set up and things, it should be, I don't want to say set and forget, but it is pretty much that people can draw stuff, press the publish button. As long as nobody's mucking around with settings, that should be fine. It should actually be in there. And we have folders and subfolders, so all the mods and PMKs go into their own folder, but within a head category of common files.
Now, Miles asked an interesting question, and this is something that I think there's a whole myriad of different things that can cause files to slow down. But what are the main culprits that you found that cause your major projects to slow down?
The thing that's caused us the most issues in many, many years, and I know there's quite a few other Archicad firms around, is embedded libraries with master DDL scripts. We've had one that's done the rounds all over the place, which basically maps a whole bunch of extra JPEGs in there, about 4 meg of data, which is fine on its own. But when you take that and put it into a bathroom that occurs in 500 homes, so 500 times 4 meg, and then it's in the bathroom, and then it's in the internal type, and then it's in the house type, you end up with gigs of data, and the files just crumple, absolutely crumple. That's probably the key thing.
Yes.
Because every time it opens a file, it obviously rereads these things. and to try and clean that out is hours and hours of work, potentially a day of work. The other one is the bloating of attributes as well, can cause some issues, not just a size issue, but if you end up with duplicate layers and things like that, it can cause some other headaches as well, where things start disappearing off plans.
Yeah, when people aren't using their layer combinations properly.
Yeah.
I've often found, and this is the recommendations from Graphisoft probably nearly a decade ago, was basically the first thing you need to do on a major project is to basically remove the layout book. The layout book itself, it contributes to about 50% of the size of the file. And depending upon the number of views that you have placed, like elevation sections, room elevations, that is a huge one as well. So there's a number of different myriads of things that can cause a slowdown, and you know, master library parts, I tell you, GDL objects, they can kill you, and they tend to squash people and corrupt and infect a lot of files as soon as something gets copied and pasted. Another comment Paul made is interesting as well about number of 2D elements. Yes, you know, once you bring in a large DWG and you know it turns into 30,000 2D elements, yes, that file slows down in 2D navigation as well. So yes, that's a really important point.
Another key one we've found recently is please don't take like a 50 meg JPEG for a texture, or worse yet, a logo, and then put it onto your squeeze it down to a very small size and then put it on your title block. And so you've got this 50 meg thing that is squeezed down, and it appears, you go to PDF it and it just dies because it can't handle producing 100 sheets with this huge high-res JPEG on it.
Yeah. There's one comment from Linguista about the ability to introduce, they introduced re-indexing attributes in 24. I think yes they have, but I don't. Is that about? Did you talk about that in your presentation? I missed it because I wasn't listening for a second.
Other than generally indexing numbers, yes, the re-index function is still quite a manual amount of work. In a perfect world, you just don't muck around with the attributes. We tend to, with that master and fit out type thing, you'll generally find that we'll have one file that'll be the master for attributes as well. So if you need a new composite, like a wall type or something like that, you take it from there, and then you very carefully use the attribute manager to not append it, to add it to the other file without appending, so the index numbers and everything all matches. But it's that's a whole session itself on attribute management.
Oh yeah, I know it is. And Patrick's talking about some of the challenges that he faces with annotation associated with hotlinks items. If we annotate in a host story, we find sometimes we lose associated annotation that is associated in the hotlink.
If you swap a hotlink out, like you delete one out and put one in, or refresh generally is okay, like if you just update it. But if you make any fundamental changes, it can, because especially if you've got dimension strings or anything like that, it's not to that wall, it's actually that instance of that wall that you're dimensioning to. So if you've deleted a mod out or broken it or replaced it, then it'll drop potentially whole dimension strings and a whole series of annotations with that. So.
And my preference, and I think we've talked about this previously, but my preference is that if any annotation that you want to do, you do it. That you take the documentation for that module out of that story, and then and all you're sending out of that as a module is the 3D content.
Yeah.
Oh, nothing like Scott Moore with his Dorothy Dix. What's your recommendation for synchronizing attributes across multiple file setups?
There's got to be one file. I mean, we obviously you sort of go for one file, small to medium to large file. We, on the layout book, we don't care about attributes. It's kind of irrelevant because they're just going PNGs. But yeah, as I said before, basically one file's got to lead the charge. Now, we have had other projects where we've had like 5 buildings and a master plan file things. We've actually ended up having like a separate, just an empty file, but only attributes.
Yep.
And it needs to be managed by one person. Whoever's the model manager on the job needs to be the one who basically says, yes, I will create this composite for you, and I'll go and shell it out via attributes.
Yes.
And it's just another reason why we publish mods rather than save out mods and work in them, because potentially you could go and have to open and close 100 little mod files and add something to them one by one. Whereas if you've got them all in one file, you add it in one place, publish, and everything follows after that.
Yeah, no, I'm a fan of that. But no, Scott had a very wonderful Excel spreadsheet, which we ran text files out of the attribute manager, and he pushed them into Excel and did attribute checks on major projects. So it's a good Dorothy Dick, Scott. I'm sorry he hasn't been able to save you and make your life any easier. Mauricio, best method to build library parts in house. A lot of objects downloaded from the internet will bring attributes into your files. Yeah, I know, it's the hardest thing, but then sometimes when people build library parts in the office, they're amateur at it, and they're not as good as Pat, and they become bloated, and then you kill your project anyway with the number of polygons.
Yes.
Great session, helpful, thanks, amazing. Everyone loved it, mate.
Okay.
Is there a limit on the number of nesting hotlinks that can affect the performance?
Not that we've found. I'm not sure how many babushkas you can have, but at the end of the day, you reach a natural limit anyway, that unless you start modulating like really small things, and we've pushed pretty hard. We've had a component of a joinery into a joinery mod, into an apartment, into a thing. So we've kind of probably got 6 or 7 layers deep with that, and that was largely because the it was almost like a flat pack. It was for a student accommodation block, and you end up having bases, and we could then schedule that out for them to say how many joinery component type 3s are there, and we were producing schedules out of that. It's like a cutting list almost.
Dave asked a question. He's new to modules, so he's wanting to know how you can clarify how to publish out a module using the organizer.
Sorry, is that Damien Wilson?
Yeah, he's changed his name, has he?
I don't know.
Anyway, no. Tell him to look at the Archicad reference guide.
Yeah, to be honest, the actual online Graphisoft help guide is really good. It's just the first option that they've got listed there is save a PLN as a mod, and I'm like, please don't do that. If you want repeatability, you've got to use the publisher.
Yes.
And it's like it's no different from a DWG or PDF or whatever. You've just got to go through, set it up, set your file, publishing path. And we'll spit them out, and that's pretty efficient.
And Patrick's got one last one that will, before we try and get a break, we might not get a break by the time we answer the question. It'll be time for the next session. But in a multi-file structure, where is the central point where you manage your attributes from? So he asked whether it's in the master, whether it's in master planning, whether it's in a separate attribute file and then attribute manager to override them all.
Depends where you are. For an apartment block, it would be the master file where we've got the aggregation of this, because you might well have 2 different buildings. So you might have a fit-out file for each building. That being said, though, and if we were to say a housing file, so we're doing 800 lots and we've got a typology file which is 1,200 stories high, the master plan is very much the result of that. So you would make your changes in the typology file, because that's really what's driving it. If you're introducing a new wall type, it's because you're drawing in the typology file, not the master file.
Yeah, and it would vary depending upon the project type too, wouldn't it? You'd have to sit down and come up with a strategy depending upon the project types that you're working on, and it's not going to be the same answer for every project. So, a multi-story project that can survive in one file, it'll be in that. But if it's 5 buildings, it might be its own separate file that sits outside of that. So it's a challenging one. Like one project we worked on had 7 different building types, and we decided to maintain a centralized attribute list, but then to try and not have to deal with the modulation and overbloat the other files, we didn't even bring in the other buildings into the other file at all, into the main site file, only for perspective. Patrick asks one more question. It's probably too late, but maybe we can try and answer it in the chat afterwards, Blair. Is there a way of separating nested mods in a schedule? I've tried filtering elements by a certain mod, but it seems to trip up thinking it belongs to 2 mods, so it appears, even if you say don't show elements from nested mod A. That sounds like a babushka doll, and how do you differentiate what parts of which babushka doll?
It is. It's a bit of a blunt instrument, the skip nested modules. You don't get to choose.
I think I missed a comment also about master IDs and stuff with the Hotlink. So
I did touch on that a little bit. Yeah, there's definitely for housing we always use the lot number because everything in that module gets tagged with that ID, and we use it to find stuff as well. So it's pretty handy. It's quite powerful. It's well worth looking into.
Well, we've run over time. And Blair, mate, thank you very much for your contribution. First of all, to the panel earlier this morning and this session now. You know, being part of this, I'm very grateful. And, you know, once again, I think this is your second ARC Intensive you participated in as well. So well done, mate. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening and don't sleep like we are.
All good. Excellent.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Nathan.
All right, guys, no time for an ad break. We're straight on to the next session. Thanks a lot.
Cool. Enjoy.
Thanks.